Hey everyone, welcome to another tier list video. This one's going to be a bit different though. We're going to be going over our very first Smite 2 tier list video. So as things start to transfer over to Smite 2, because the 24/7 alpha is out, so will our tier list videos. So as with all my videos, this is mostly going to be for ranked conquest or regular conquest if you want to apply it to that. Right now, at least, conquest and arena are the only two game modes that are really out right now for Smite 2. But we're going to be going over bans first, then what I think is top 3 in support, top 3 in ADC, top 3 in mid, top 3 in jungle, and top 3 in solo as well. And I know you guys only see 2 characters here. It's because we're going to be going over bans and placing these characters down accordingly. And after we do this, I'll just like throw up a traditional tier list, S or double S to D tier, just to show you guys what I think is like just by far the best and what's by far the worst. So yeah, without further ado, let's get right into this. First off, we're going to have our bans. Bacchus, unbelievably broken. This character is so busted. This, like, if we talk about the top all-time releases in Smite history, I know Smite 2 hasn't had this yet, but like this might as well just go down as like a top 3 release or whatever in Smite history. Bacchus is so unbelievably broken. If you don't believe me, just keep watching these clips. I mean, these are insane. He does so much damage, so they pretty much gave him they made his kit mostly the same, but they pretty much gave him a polyproc on his one. So he no longer gets percent damage mitigation anymore on his passive, and his one still gives him the protections and still gives him power, but he also gets like pretty much a polyproc. So whenever he chugs, he gets this extra damage when he autos somebody, and he gets this infinitely too. So you can pretty much go into a fight with this sort of active and then hit somebody with it, then chug again, then hit somebody with it again. So you essentially get like 2 polyprocs like right off the rip in a fight, if that makes sense. So Bacchus is getting a mixture of like different ways to do damage, essentially different scaling. So he's getting a little bit of physical scaling from his 2. It's going to scale with 85% strength, and he's also getting protection scaling, which is huge. So Bacchus 2 is getting 60% scaling from physical and magical protections, which is absolutely insane. His chug also is like little polyproc as well. The damage scaling here is getting physical and magical protection scaling as well. So Bacchus is not only getting tankier with his passive, because when he gets his passive up, he's getting percent protections, but he's also getting more power when he chugs, and he's also getting insane scaling from protections too. So you can build full tank Bacchus and just one-shot people with your one-kit people with your combo, with your kit. It's absolutely insane. So Bacchus for me 100% is going to be a top pick, top ban. If you are not first pick, I would highly suggest banning him, and if you are first pick, look to pick him. You can flex this character between support, solo. In fact, I think in solo probably is going to be his best role from my understanding right now, but he's obviously very effective in support. Shoot, you can flex Bacchus anywhere besides ADC right now, in my opinion. Jungle as well, mid if you want to. I think solo is going to be his best role, but almost anywhere is fine. So Bacchus, top of the crop, absolute best character in the game, I think, right now. You should be banning him or picking him every single game. Next up, we have Jingwei. Jingwei is another character I think that's really, really good in terms of, ADCs. Her crit damage is absolutely insane. There's a bug right now going around with her, which is primarily why I ban her if I'm like first pick and I don't want to ban Bacchus. The reason I ban her is because there was a bug where she was getting like invincibility while still being able to hit people and kill people. And obviously I don't want people abusing that in my game, abusing that bug. I don't know if they fixed it yet or not. I don't think they have, because an update hasn't rolled through yet. So I'm assuming they're going to fix it sometime in the near future. But that is like the primary reason I think why I ban her. But she's also really good outside the bug. As you can see here, her kit is mostly the same as it was in Smite 1. Her passive allows her to essentially fly to a location from base, which is awesome. Her one knocks her up just like before, but the difference too is that there's actually like another circle outside of her one, the outer area, and she also will give herself consistently refreshing herself attack speed while she's in that area. So she no longer has to like keep going up and down on the one. Her 2 is pretty much the same. It has not as high crit scaling. I think it's like 15% now. And this scales up, the ability charges do, but it's still really, really good. The damage scales up. So before, the damage was capped off at about 110% scaling, but now it obviously goes up to 115%, which is really, really nice. So it's going to make her auto attacks do more damage. Her auto attacks mostly scale off of physical, as you can see, 100% strength, but also a little bit of intelligence too. If you want to kind of like cook up a nice little build with her, you can get a little bit of intelligence scaling. And then her 3, of course, is going to give her increased strength if she dashes forward, physical power, just like before, and movement speed as well, especially if you 1-3. But the biggest thing I think now is her ult. So her ult not only allows her to pretty much do what it did before, which is she can fly in a certain direction pretty much bombarding the ground beneath her while she does it, but she can actually also go the opposite way too while she's in the air. So she can actually like sort of dash forwards in the air and then also dash backwards, which is really, really cool in my opinion. But overall, besides these changes in similarities, I think Jingwei is going to have some of the highest DPS out of any hunter right now. So she's not only going to be extremely safe, how she always has been, but her damage is going to be some of the best damage output. So I just don't think there's a reason to not go Jingwei, unless like maybe you're picking one of these other two ADCs, which we'll go over in a little bit. And then finally for the bans list, we have Loki. Loki is honestly quite the troublemaker right now in a lot of my games. I can't tell who the most OP jungler in the game is right now. I kind of want to go with Loki, but I also think Fenrir is really, really good. The thing about Loki right now is that he's going to one-shot your carries late game, especially because there's no more like Aegis in the game and no more, sorry, there is Aegis, but your carries aren't going to go Aegis all the time because you can only build one relic, if that makes sense. So a lot of times people want to maybe experiment with like combat blink or beads, right? You can't always afford to go Aegis. And if you don't have Aegis versus Loki, you're just going to die to his damage late game. That's just from what I've experienced, from what my teammates have experienced a lot in the games right now. There's just a lot of damage that this character does, a lot of like burst, like tick damage that just ends up killing you. The other thing too is that there's not really too many auras in the game for protections. In fact, I don't really think there are any on items. Ares does have some on his too, which is nice, but his items aren't like support items aren't really giving any. So Loki is going to be able to sort of one-shot your carries late game unless they are forced to go Aegis, and if they do that, then they can't get beats for other things. So this character is really troublesome right now, and I think he's actually definitely like a top ban, and he's also like a really, really, really solid jungle pick if you want to pick him. Okay, so now that we're over bans, let's go ahead and go into supports, and we'll go ahead and drag Bacchus over here too, just because, you know, we already went over bans. Bacchus is primarily support, even though he can be flexed. But Bacchus we went over. Ares is next. So Ares, there's been a lot of debate with Ares. I think some people think he sucks. I know some higher players were saying he's not that good. Higher support players, former SPL ones. I personally think he's really good. I know some other people think he's good too. The thing about Ares is that he is not really able to ult right now. And what I mean by that is there's so many ways to immune Ares ult. So obviously a carry getting beads is one way, of course. But the other way too is that now that the AoE beads is in the game, the purification talisman that you can use at any point in the game. This was in Smite 1, but you had to ult to get it off. Now you can use it whenever. Now that this is actually in the game, the enemy support can just go this and negate Ares ult almost every single time for him and his allies. And so like mid to late game Ares ult just feels like it's non-existent. The other thing too is that they treated Ares ult like Daji ult, in the sense that if you beads Ares ult, it actually gets cleansed off you now instead of staying on you and lingering on you. And the reason why that's big is because before, if you like beads too early or were CC immune too early at an earlier point before Ares pulled you, you could still get pulled. But now it's like completely just erased off of you. The change no longer exists on you. So it doesn't matter if the beads run out while he's still channeling, he won't pull you. The other thing too is that there's other abilities in the game, and I don't know if this is purely intentional. It probably is. But Ares ult counts as a displacement. So there are other abilities in the game now, for example, Odin 3, that makes him displacement immune. So Ares actually can't pull Odin while he's 3ing, which is like kind of silly to me. And there's also a bug with Ares ult that half the time he's not even stunning people when they like land at his ult location. It's so weird. So overall, Ares ult is just pretty much non-existent late game for the most part, which is why a lot of people are saying he's bad. The reason why I still think he's a top 3 support, in fact, I think he's probably the best support outside of Bacchus. And the reason why I think that is because his base kit is still really, really strong. Ares chains are just still insane. They're pretty much the exact same as they were in Smite 1. They did get nerfed a little bit, so they're on a bit of a longer cooldown now. I believe it's around 15 seconds. And the chains no longer go on cooldown immediately when you shoot out. So they'll only go on cooldown if you miss the chain, or if you connect with the third and final chain, then it'll actually go on cooldown. But in the process between chains 1 and 3, it will no longer go on cooldown anymore. Whereas before it went on cooldown at after the first shot, regardless of if it hit or missed. So you have that. That's a little bit of a nerf. But Ares' 2 is like one of the only, if not the only thing giving aura protections to your allies, which is actually nice. So you're making you and your allies about 30 prots tankier. On top of that too, Ares' passive is now an AoE power passive. So Ares actually gives intelligence and strength in an AoE, so to himself and allies around him, based off of, I believe intelligence is based off your cooldown on Ares, and then I believe the strength is based off your protections. And the aura also increases with levels. So late game, you're actually seeing yourself giving your allies a lot of power. And a mixture between all the power that you're giving your allies, all the protections that you can be giving them too with your 2, you're really buffing your allies. On top of that, your chains are still crippling out enemies, preventing them from really being like a massive influence or a massive threat in the fights, because a lot of these characters, again, like Fenrir or Susanoo, they rely off dashes, just how I explained in Smite 1, how his chains are just so impactful. Also, too, fun fact, you cannot combat blink when you're crippled. So you're actually stopping combat blinks when you cripple enemies as well. So that's a little cool thing too. And since Ares, I think, has, I'm pretty sure right as of right now, he has the only cripple in Smite 2, like, because CERN 2 no longer cripples. So I'm pretty sure his is the only one. I could be wrong. If I am, just feel free to let me know in the comments. But that just makes him even more of a powerhouse in my opinion. So that's great. And then his 3 does damage. I've never found his 3 to be like the best, but it does do a good amount of damage. So with all that being said, despite Ares' ult being kind of ass right now, I still think the rest of his kit is really good, and he's definitely still worth playing, and he's one of my highest win rate characters right now when it comes to ranked. Finally, for supports, we have Ymir. So Ymir is pretty much going to do everything he did in Smite 1, in the sense that, like, his 2 slows, his 3 stuns, right? His ult, dude, his ult's actually insane. If you guys look at the amount of damage his ult does, so in Smite 1, I believe his ult went up to 1100 damage and it was like 150% scaling. This time his ult goes up to like 1350 base damage and like 160% scaling. It's the craziest thing ever. So Ymir ult's gonna slap. That's why, like, he can kind of like pre-explode it and just like do so much damage to you immediately. Ymir's kit's pretty much gonna be the same exact thing. The biggest difference is a lot of his numbers got nerfed, so the slow numbers got nerfed. The stun duration went like decreased. I think it went from 2.25 at max rank to about 1.6. And then his passive went from 10% to, or sorry, went from 15% to 10%. The biggest newest change that Ymir actually ended up getting was that he can now sort of like propel himself forward with his wall, which is actually really cool. Personally, I actually like the wall better in Smite 1 a little bit more. I think it's a little bit more fluid. I don't know if anybody else agrees with that, but I feel like his wall in Smite 1 just felt a little bit cleaner. Like, sometimes I don't really want to be knocking people backwards if I just trap them in like right at the edge. I just want them to kind of like sit there. But yeah, he can actually rocket jump himself forward, which actually gets him out of a lot of crazy situations and has saved his life while I play him more times than I can count, and he's gone away from me more times than I can count too because of it. So overall, I think Ymir is going to be very solid, no pun intended, but he's going to be super solid, and he's going to have his spot as top 3 support for me, just because of all the CC and all like the debuffing and damage that Ymir can bring, as well as being able to trap people in with his wall. So next up we have ADC. So ADC, we already went over Jingwei a little bit, so I'm going to put it right here. Next up, we have Soul and Neith. Now, Soul's damage is actually going to feel like super insane right now. So she can actually build crit, which is actually insane. So it actually allows her scaling to like... The problem with Soul in Smite 1 is that her damage early game, her pressure early game was like really nuts, but her scaling late game was like really bad. It was really ass. And that, I think, has really gotten solved a lot in Smite 2. So her kit's mostly going to be the same as in Smite 1. But the biggest difference is that she can build physical items now. She can build crit now. And so she can actually crit late game. And if you are thinking about soul passive, right, like max heat soul passive with crit late game, it's going to feel insane. Now, just like all characters in the game, remember, most of her damage primarily is going to come from strength, 100% strength scaling, and then 20% intelligence scaling, and that is her auto attack damage. So every character in the game is going to have mostly strength scaling on their auto attacks, even if they're magical based characters. And so that way, even if we build a crit item, we're still actually going to get a lot of damage from that crit item, out of that crit item, even though it's only going to give us strength. But for the most part, Soul's kit is mostly going to stay the same. Her 1 is actually going to get a massive increase in radius as she gains more heat. Her passive is going to give her increased power, both strength and intelligence wise, as well as attack speed. At max heat, your basic attack damage is also going to be increased, just like previously. And yeah, so for the most part, Soul's going to have pretty much the same kit. She's just going to be able to snowball super well early game, like hyper early, and her late game is going to be really good because, again, you can build crit and build these other items that help you scale late game as well. So I think for the most part, Soul, super solid pick. There's a lot of snowballing in the game right now, and I just think that she is like pretty much a must pick in ADC. Next up, we have Neith. Dude, Neith feels actually insane. I could even argue that Neith is like a top ADC. By the way, any of these 3 ADCs I think are a top ADC. I think Jingwei is. She's going to be a little bit slower, I think, in the early game, just how she always was. Soul's going to be way stronger in the early game. But I think Jingwei might skill a bit better than Soul does. but all three of these ADCs are going to be nuts. Neith, they pretty much took her kit, kept it the same, and then gave her more. So like she can now like root off the backflip if she has like a weave there, as well as obviously rooting on the one still. Her ult's still that global ult that like goes through the map, goes through walls and stuff like that. World Weaver, I believe it's called, and also hits and stuns people. And she can just get like insane scaling. She can build things like Soul Reaver and like other things that give her ability based damage way more damage than it did before. So Neith is actually going to be a top hunter. You can play her also a mid, which is why I didn't put like another character here mid, because I think Neith is actually a really good flex to mid right now as well. So like Neith, you can kind of play ADC mid, doesn't really matter. Her presence is going to be super strong. Again, her AoE ability based damage is going to be super strong, as well as all the CC that she gets, and her auto attack damage. Of course, she's still a hunter, so she's still going to be doing a lot of auto attack damage. All things considered, Neith is going to be a massive influence on the map, and I think she's just going to be a top 3 ADC. She's going to do way more damage than CERN, would do way more damage than on her. Out of all 3 of these characters, I think probably the one I typically like the most, I lean to the most, is Soul. I'm a bit biased because I hate Neith. I hate the design of that character. That's just me. And then I think Jingwei is good, but again, we're in more of like a like Smite 2 is very snowbally, and Soul's early game is super strong. It really helps with that snowball. So that's why I like Soul the most. But yeah, for the most part, either of these 3 ADCs, you can pick them. They're going to do great. So here we have Kukulkan. He pretty much has the same exact kit design as in Smite 1, so you're going to be very familiar with him. The biggest difference between his kit in Smite 2 and Smite 1 is going to be his 2. So Slipstream is his 2. This is, of course, when you activate it, it's going to give you some form of slow immunity and you gain bonus movement speed. But if you activate it while you're in Whirlwind, you will get a nice dash that actually does a lot of damage. I believe it's about 285 plus 85% intelligence-based scaling. So your dash is going to do a lot of damage, and it's actually going to provide Kukulkan with even more safety as he normally would get. It also actually slows too, which I didn't even realize at first. So you get a 40% slow from the dash if you pass through somebody. Kukulkan's going to do a lot. He has a decent amount of, not really lockdown CC, but he's going to have multiple slows in his kit now, right? His 1's, of course, is massive slow. His 2's now going to be a slow if you dash through somebody. And his ult's going to be a massive knockback. So this character is great for just kind of like pretty much sniping people with his ult, right? Like, and just doing a bunch of area damage, AoE damage, and just insane scaling late game if you can like build the right build. I did a Transcendence Soul Reaver. No, sorry, not Soul Reaver. I did a Transcendence and Book of Thoth build. And late game, I built some other items, of course, and I had like 1200 power, I think. It was absolutely insane because remember, you can build physical items now. So Transcendence is going to up your mana. Kukulkan's passive gives him more intelligence based off the mana he has. And the power I'm getting from Transcendence as well is not going to waste because it's scaling to my auto attacks because they're strength based. Remember, most of your auto attack scaling is going to be through strength. So because I was like double stacking and doing all that stuff, my damage late game was absolutely insane. My one was hitting for like 900 plus at least. And it was just unbelievable. So Kukulkan, I think, is going to be one of the best mid laners out of like all the mid laners up here. He has some of the best artillery. He has some of the best AoE spread. He's got some of the best damage. And because he now has a dash, and of course he has his regular speed boost and slow immunity, he's going to have some of the biggest safety as well. And then we have Hecate. This character still does some stuff that I feel like I don't know as well, but she's a little bit weird. So I think Hecate takes a little bit to sort of get going. She's not going to have like the best early game from what I've been told from other mid laners that are professional mid laners and play her a lot. But when she does get going, she has some of the most effectiveness in a team fight. So she's going to be able to teleport herself to places. She's going to be able to teleport allies. She can also teleport the enemy with her ult from their location to you guys, so she can displace the enemy. She has some other CC in her kit too. She can like mez people. She has a lot of damage. There's actually a bug right now, which hopefully they fix here in the next week or two. But there's a bug where like her one like quadruple hit, so like it literally one shot somebody. I don't know exactly what causes that. I think it's completely randomized. I'm not sure, but hopefully it gets fixed soon. But with all things considered, Hecate's kit is going to be one of the most fun, one of the most unique, especially because it's new. So like if you're a mid laner, try to play her. She's really fun, and it's going to be one of the most effective, especially in team fights. Like it'll have the enemy's team's comms like saying what the hell is going on right now, right? Like where am I going? What's going on? So she has a lot of play to her kit, and she has some of the most damage. Between her and Kukulkan, I'd probably prefer. Man, that's a hard one actually. I'd probably prefer Kukulkan just because I'm more familiar with his kit right now. But I've seen like I've played against Paul Sakate, for example, and like he has a really nasty one. So I've seen what really good players can do with Hakate, and like they can make this character just feel like the most absurd character in the game. So definitely play her. She's definitely a top 3 mage. And then finally we have like Neith. Like I said before, I think that you could just flex Neith to mid and completely fine. You're gonna have all that AoE damage. You're gonna have all that ability-based damage too that you'd be getting from these 2 mages here, all that AoE and ability. And yeah, life's good. So these would be my top 3 for mid. All right, so up next we have jungle, and we'll just put Loki over here too, because of course Loki's a jungler. We already went over him, but we're gonna go over Fenrir. Fenrir is for the most part gonna be the same as in Smite 1. I feel like I'm on repeat today saying that, but it's the truth. His kit is pretty much the same. Except I think his brutalize now is able to crit, which is like one of the biggest differences. So like if you actually build crit on Fenrir, you can actually like crit with his brutalize, which is hilarious. But his kit right now is going to be super strong. He feels like he has a ton of power. He's got like a bunch of lifesteal and power scaling from his 2, of course. He can jump stun when he's at max runes at 5 runes. His brutalize just does a lot of damage, and again can crit. So if you want to go like a nice little like, if you want to cook and want to go a crit build, you can do that. And then his ult's also going to be really effective because people aren't really going to go, like, people are really torn right now between what relic they want to go and what relic they should go, I guess you could say. For example, someone like Susano really wants to go Blink most of the time, I would say. And I actually had a comp match earlier last week against Panatom. I was Ares, we even had a Fenrir on our team. Panatom still went Blink into us. We punished him for it. We ended up losing, unfortunately, but we punished him for it, like, a lot. And so you really have to decide like what relic you need to go, right? And I think someone like Susano still wants to go Blink most of the time, and so someone like Fenrir can just look for those picks in the early game super easily if he does go Blink, right? You just jump stun him, you ult him, and then you drag him to your team, and then your team just does the rest and you kill him. So I think that's what's actually going to make Fenrir like one of the best junglers right now, is not just his damage, like putting his damage aside, just the fact that his ult is a super massive util ult, and not everybody's going beads right now. So you just get to have so much impact with it. And also too, his ult does a shit ton of damage. I mean, you're seeing like massive numbers whenever you bite somebody, and a big chunk of their health going away. So even if they do end up beadsing your ult, like your ult for some reason just feels like it does so much damage regardless. So that's why Fenrir is going to be in my top junglers, because Fenrir is like, out of all the junglers, I feel like Fenrir has like the most util and help for his team, as well as still providing a ton of damage and being able to solo other people. Susano is really just a damage machine. He got a reworked passive a little bit that caused him to do even more damage. Like he's got some other effects in there. I'll have that up on the top right just so you guys can see it. But Susano is gonna be able to do a lot of damage. His ult actually doesn't seem like it does that much damage. I've heard a lot of complaints that his ult doesn't really do much. Maybe at least on the early game, maybe as you like scale it up, it does way more. But his ult's not really gonna do as much as it did before, it feels like. But the rest of his kit still does a ton of damage. He still has a bunch of safety. He's got his 1 that's going to give him a dash. He's got his 3 that's going to give him a dash. So he's going to be pretty safe for the most part, and he's still going to be able to do a lot of damage with the auto cancels. So Susano is definitely going to make it up here in my jungle list. Out of all 3 of these, though, I know I put Loki under the bans earlier, but I actually think Fenrir, for me personally, I think Fenrir is my favorite jungler right now. In terms of like just how much he can provide when it comes to both the util and damage aspect. I think Loki's gonna be one of the highest damaging junglers, but Fenrir is just all around, I think, a super good pickup right now. So if you guys are jungling and you haven't played Fenrir yet, try him out. He's very good. Whenever I am forced onto the jungle role because I get out called on support or whatever the case, I just go to Fenrir, and I've won pretty much almost every single game on him with ease. So I think this character is super solid. And then finally we have solo lane. So for solo lane, I think the number 1 right now is going to be Odin from what I've seen and who I've talked to. Odin seems to, and by the way, you can easily flex Odin to support if you want to. Like if it looks like a good Odin support game, you can flex him instead of Ymir, that kind of stuff. That's completely fine. But Odin seems to be the top for solo lane right now. And he just does a lot of damage. He's got his nice little cage, his nice little wall. A lot of these characters, as you can actually kind of see, they can't really get out of cages or walls. Like Ares, Ymir, Susano, Loki, unless he forces ult, Kukulkan. Like a lot of these characters that are in the game currently, either take a long time or can't really get out of the cages. And the other thing too, I think that's very important to note, is that because you can only go 1 relic, your people aren't really going Phantom Shell, at least not at a high level. Like I see an Odin on the team, and that doesn't influence the relic I'm going, because in support, you pretty much have to go Sunder right now. That's just like the name of the game. Sunder's used for securing objectives. It's used for invading. It's even used for doing damage and cleaning up kills. So even if they have an Odin on the enemy team, I'm not really going Phantom Shell, which means that characters like Kukulkan and all of them are going to be very susceptible to Odin ult. He's going to get a lot of value from that ult, from being able to trap people in, separate fights, that kind of jazz. So that's why I think Odin is actually like a super, super, super top soul laner right now. And he also just does a lot of damage with his 3, with pretty much his entire kit. He feels very safe. I've seen him get out of a lot of crazy situations just because of the way his kit works. So that's why Odin's here. Up next, we have Chalk. Chalk feels like he just does a ton of damage with still having like that CC pressure with his slow and of course his ult being a knock up silence for a few seconds. Chalk feels like he's really honestly hard to kill. And yeah, I don't know. There's not really much else to Chalk. Chalk's kind of like super simple, if you, I guess. And his kit's kind of like the same. So I would just put Chalk in soul lane as well, like as a top 2 soul laner. I've gone against him quite a bit, and he doesn't feel as impactful as Odin, of course, but like he's gonna feel still super super impactful, hard to kill in team fights, a lot of AOE, a lot of zoning with his 1-3, and he just uses items super well right now. So I would put Odin as definitely a top soul laner, and then finally like Hades. Hades kind of got a rework to his ult, allowing him to get more abilities while he ults. Like he can actually dash while ulting now and still maintain the ult, that kind of stuff. So he's actually really cool. I think Hades is actually going to be pretty good for the most part. I don't think he's going to be as good as like Odin or Chalk, but I think he's definitely up there. And I know we're like flexing a lot of these other characters around. So if you want to flex Box's solo, again, I think solo's probably actually might be Box's best role, even though I classify him as support. So I mean, if you want to classify Box in soul lane, he's going to be better, I think, than these 3 characters. He's just the best character in the game right now, in my opinion. But Hades, for the most part, does a lot of things that he just did in Smite 1. Not really too much to talk about, honestly, with him. He's just kind of there doing a lot of damage, especially to the squishies, and still being tanky. I don't know, like, I think there is a pretty big drop-off when it comes to the soul laners, or actually when it comes to some of these, but especially the soul laners. So, like, I think Odin Bacchus would be by far top 2 soul laners right now, and then there'd be, like, a pretty, like, decent gap, maybe, and then Chalk, and then probably even a bigger gap, and then you get Hades. That's kind of how I would look at it, and I just think Hades is probably better than the other soul laners. Mordred, I still need some time to look at. For the most part, I think me and a lot of other players think that Mordred isn't that good right now. I think his kit's decent, it's all right, but his numbers are a little bit on the weaker side than I think most people would like. Although I have had a game where like a Mordred has popped off here and there, but for the most part, just haven't seen like the numbers coming out of Mordred to consider him to be a top soul laner right now, at least. So I do think maybe he needs a little bit of tweaking. That's at least from my experience, what I've seen in my games personally, and from other soul laners that I've talked to that are like high level soul laners. So I think like, you know, just kind of like taking out some of these other characters, I think Hades just kind of fits the bill when it comes to soul lane. But yeah, so this is going to be the tier list for the different roles. As you can see, we have all these characters here again for bans. We have Bacchus, Jingwei, and Loki, I think would be top bans. But this is who I would put for each respective role. But let's go ahead and hop on over to the double S to D or F tier list so we can all kind of like see where I would rate each character. All right, guys, here is the official tier list. Double S to F is what I decided to do. Yeah, I'm just going to like quickly go through this since we already kind of went in depth with all the characters earlier. But double S, I think Bacchus, Fenrir are just by far the 2 best characters in the game. I think Bacchus is just the best. And then Fenrir is kind of like, I wouldn't say a close second, but he's definitely up there. Again, I just think the util from Fenrir is amazing. And of course, Bacchus being able to pretty much just kill your carries throughout the game, even just one item. One thing I actually like doing on Bacchus is going Stone of Binding first because it gives you a really good amount of protections and all that kind of stuff. I'm still experimenting with builds, but Stone of Binding first, and he also abuses it really, really well. The passive being 15 flat proc shred, both magical and physical at level 1 through 20. Essentially, it's the same. It's 15. So. He abuses that really well, and yeah, this would be like my double S. Now for S, Hecate and Kukulkan, pretty much very similar when it comes to like effectiveness, I think, in a game. Hecate maybe being a little bit more effective if you can use it really well. Loki still being really good. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, well, I just put Loki as a ban and didn't put Fenrir as a ban, but I put Fenrir higher on the list, so that might, you know, scratch some heads. I understand that. I think Loki is just more of an annoyance. Loki's always been an annoyance, let's be honest, but he's more of an annoyance, especially because it feels like he can one-shot carries in people late game. But just thinking about it from like an actual game perspective, I think Fenrir is going to be a bit more effective just because he has that extra util in general. So I ban Loki purely out of just being more annoyed by him. And I do think it's easier for me to counter a Fenrir because I like to say spam Ares and all that kind of stuff when I play. So it's easier for me to do something like counter Fenrir versus a Loki when I actually play the game, which is why I put Loki under the bans. So these two characters I think are gonna be up there. Odin's gonna be an S tier. Just because Odin is the GOAT right now. I don't think he's quite double S, although he might be kind of close to it. I just think he's probably going to be one of the best soul laners right now besides Bacchus. And then we have all three of our ADCs actually made up into S tier. I think all three of these characters are really, really good. But as you can see here, there's a big drop off between the other two ADCs, which I actually have in D. I've tried out on her. I've tried out CERN. They don't really feel that good. On her felt decent. CERN didn't feel good at all. Now, maybe I wasn't playing CERN correctly. Maybe there's a different way to play him. All I know is that there is a big difference between me playing Soul and me playing these characters, like massive gap. And I've just been seeing people spam pick these three. So I know these three feel good, and I've played with and against these characters, and I know these two don't really feel nearly as good. So that's why they're down here. In terms of A tier, we have Ares. Ares is only an A tier because his ult is kind of ass right now. Again, if his ult was way, way better, then I would actually probably put Ares in S or even double S tier. He was in double S tier prior to the 24/7 alpha coming out. He was really, really broken in other previous iterations of the game, but they since have nerfed him like quite a bit, nerfed a lot of his damage and all that kind of stuff. So he is an A, mostly for the fact that his ult is just kind of ass. And then Chalk's here. Doesn't do anything crazy, just is Chalk. He does a lot of damage. He has decent CC, good util, AoE, all that kind of jazz. And then we have Susano. We have Ymir. Morgan is actually the only one that I wasn't exactly sure where I wanted to put her. I didn't want to put her in S or double S tier. I've seen her be effective, not too effective though yet. Even seeing other Morgan mains player, she's cool because she can transform to anybody, but I haven't seen enough games with her yet, to be honest. And I've actually played quite a bit of games. And people don't seem to really be picking her that much, even if like Hakate and Kukulkan aren't being picked. So I just kind of like leave her as like in A tier. I think she's probably good, but I still need a little bit more data on her to see like exactly how good she is. I know she's definitely not like up here, so which is why I put her into A. For B, we just have Hades, Mordred, and Zeus. Hades I think is good. I just don't think Hades is going to be nearly as good as like Odin, and maybe not as good as Chalk. I think it depends on the game. Mordred, still need more stuff looking at him, more data on him. Zeus, I think, actually is pretty versatile. You can make an argument for him being an A tier. I don't think he's S tier at all, but I think you could definitely make an argument for him being an A tier. I think you can go like, I think people are calling it like ADC Zeus, where you can go like more auto attack based like damage and attack speed and all that kind of stuff, and just do a ton of damage because of Zeus passive and the way it stacks and all that kind of jazz. I haven't done any of that yet, but I've seen it. It's very effective. Zeus still does a trillion damage late game. Let me like throw that out there. He still does a lot of damage. His 3 now stuns. He does feel actually really, really good, but he does get jumped on pretty easily, I think. And so it can be kind of hard to live in fights, which is kind of why I have him under B. But he can still be a glass cannon if you want to think about it like that. Under C, we have Anubis and Bologna. Nothing too crazy going on here. I think Anubis is like decent. I think Bologna's decent. I've seen them do well, but I think they are a little bit more niche. I think Anubis is mostly getting picked if like these characters are sort of off the table or just really, really don't look good. But 9 times out of 10, I think these characters, like these mid laners, are all getting picked. And then Bologna, it's kind of like the same thing. I just don't really see her getting picked that much. It's a little iffy around if you really want to pick up a Bologna when you could really just be picking Bacchus, Odin, or Chalk. And then, of course, D tier, we have the Hunters. We have Thanatos, too. Thanatos is a little interesting because I would actually think Thanatos would be getting played more, considering Aegis doesn't really get picked up as much anymore. So it's like, oh, just a free execute. But he just doesn't seem to be nearly as impactful as he was in Smite 1, at least not yet. His damage just doesn't seem to be there. So I'm not really sure what they need to do with this character, but I've seen him played a few times. He's definitely not like, I know I have him in D tier. He's not like the worst in the world, but he needs to like kind of step up, I think, when it comes to all the junglers. Like I think all the junglers right now, all the other junglers are just getting picked way more than him. Fenrir, Loki, way better. Susano, way better. He just needs to kind of I don't know, maybe get some numbers buffed or something here or there. Is all I can really say about it. But yeah, he's gonna be in D tier. And then finally we have Athena in F tier. I might get blasted for this a little bit. Dude, I played Athena in support. My goodness, she was terrible. She was god awful. Her taunt was like you taunt somebody, they take one step forward and then they're out of the taunt. Now, obviously, the taunt scales as you level it, and it also scales based off protections that you get too, scaling all the way to like 1.6, which is about zero point 0.4 seconds less than it was in Smite 2, because Smite 2 was like 2 seconds. But dude, she felt terrible in support. Like the thing about Athena is like her combo has always been you dash taunt and then like that's 90% of your kit. Then like maybe the other 10% is like ulting somebody, that kind of stuff, right? She does do damage, but like her thing has always been dash taunt. That's the big setup. These other characters, Bacchus has multiple ways to CC somebody, 3 ways in fact. Ares has multiple things in his kit, like his chains, his ores, all that kind of jazz. Ymir has multiple things in his kit. Athena is just kind of like one thing, and they just kind of ruined that one thing early game. It feels like she just can't do it. Now, I can't speak for her in other roles like jungle. I'm sure she's probably a lot better in like jungle. Maybe she's like a C tier character, maybe even a B tier character, who knows, or up there. But I can't speak on that. I haven't really seen it. I haven't played it myself. All I know is in support, this character is doo-doo. I just don't think she's that good. So this is going to be the tier list. Let me know if you guys agree, disagree with it. These characters are mostly placed based off of my experiences both playing the characters and seeing the characters in my games, like how often they're getting picked, how effective they are, and all that kind of jazz. And then of course some characters aren't really getting picked that much, so really not enough data on that. But this is gonna be the tier list. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and yeah, let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. See ya.